Thanks for being here, y'all. I see some familiar faces in the crowd and maybe some new ones too. So it's good to have everyone here. Today, the talk is titled Say Yes, and it's based off the book Radical Acceptance, Living with a Heart of a Buddha by Tara Brach. So mainly, obviously, the talk's going to be kind of about radical acceptance. But originally what I thought I was going to do is kind of just lay out, very step by step, well, radical acceptance, right? But after a darshan with Lama, started thinking a bit more about actually clarifying what radical acceptance is and maybe what it actually isn't. Um, so yeah, let's kick it off. So to get started, radical acceptance is actually a term first developed or coined by Marsha Linehan. So she's a psychologist, and she herself struggled with DBT, or oopsie, not DBT, borderline personality disorder, which is a very traumatic disorder for a lot of people. It's very difficult and it involves a lot of big volatile emotions. She herself had it, and she was finding that other modalities at that time just weren't quite working for her. So what she did is she started learning actually a bit about Buddhism. And she started taking little bits of Buddhism. And again, she was already a psychologist. And she started implementing them into what's now called dialectical behavioral therapy. So it's just amazing to me that, there was, I guess, this crossover, even in psychology of, Eastern, Western, right? And one of the main terms that arose from that was this idea of radical acceptance that even in the midst of all these big emotions or maybe really difficult times, we have the ability to actually stay right on the dot and kind of find peace in the middle of that chaos. So this was a little different than some other forms of therapy at the time. You have your classics, CBT or behavioral therapy. These are really looking at the thoughts themselves, or maybe the chains of karma that have occurred over time, right? Leading to maybe where we are now, looking in our life histories. But DBT was kind of interesting because it was very present focused. Well, what's going to happen if right now, like there's like this big rush of energy from something I was triggered by, right? We can't just quite follow every little thought, it's very chaotic. So what Marsha did is she brought in mainly the ideas of mindfulness and compassion. And then this is what Tara elaborates on further, and she calls them the two wings of radical acceptance, mindfulness and compassion. So, yeah, I just remember being in school and it was just kind of like a right place, right time sort of feel. I was coming here and I was like, learning about DBT, and I was like, this like kind of sounds like Buddhist in a weird way. And then like later on, it's like, oh, like she incorporated Buddhist thought. Like I found this out years later, and I was like, oh, that totally makes sense. And then you actually see that a lot with many of the what's called the third wave psychotherapies, which is really kind of a neat point. I also bring this piece up because it brings again more clarity to the term radical acceptance. It's not necessarily actually like a purely Buddhist term. So when we're talking about it, we have to be mindful that um, radical acceptance, we're looking at it as this kind of blend of the two. There's still going to be this Western, again, that psychotherapy origin in the term radical acceptance. And that gets a little hairy, right? Because in therapy, it's very much like we're working with the self, pretty much, right? We're like, what can we maybe add, take away from this self that's going, this personal I, maybe? How can we better fit that into life and whatnot? Whereas, in Buddhism, it gets funny because then your teachers are like, well, there's not really an inherently existing self. So then you're like, well, what is it that I'm working on, right? And I'm still, I don't know, I'm still in a mind bender with that one. So I try not to like think about it too hard, but um, for now, I'm just going to leave it at like we're kind of making friends with a lot more, which I think is really beautiful. We're not just limiting it to like our own selves, or it's kind of branching out a little more. It's making friends with the world, maybe the universe, right? That's just a little idea I had there. But excuse me. Lama and I, we had a darshan. It was like 2 days ago or so. And again, I had this talk really laid out, very step by step, and jump into darshan, and it just flipped it on its head. I was like, okay, you got to get back to the groundwork here. But really, I mean, it was an amazing session talking with Lama, and I think some of the things that he mentioned were really kind of insightful, right? Um, so one thing he mentioned with the radical acceptance at a glance is what I'll call it. Um, is he says often the form or often the takeaway is a form of stoicism, right? So you kind of hear radical acceptance. It's kind of been maybe wrapped into some new age spirituality kind of stuff where it's just, kind of just sit in there, thoughts are floating by, right? Very detached, maybe. I'm just going to accept everything. I'm just going to accept everything. Like there's like a war in Gaza. I'm just going to accept it, right? Or whatever. So that can be a little bit problematic. And, Lama was really, again, making this point of what we need to do is bring clarity in. So not only we're using this mindfulness and this compassion to be able to approach thoughts, emotions, and whatnot, situations with gentleness and awareness, right? Knowing where we are in space and time. But there's also the sense of, what's actually going on, bringing in clarity and therefore also bringing in wisdom. And to go a little further on that is, this is important because it brings some discernment in to maybe what's good and bad in our lives. And what kind of blew my mind is he said, well, yeah, like there's certain things that we have to clearly see are maybe harming ourselves and others, and we need to stop doing them. It's super simple, but I don't know why. It was like radical acceptance. I was like, oh, well, I can just accept whatever, or I guess the downfall would be like, you know, I'm an asshole to everyone. Right? That's just how I am. I'm just an asshole. Like, you know, so, it is. That's actually a great first step because that's the first step, which is great though, too, because you're kind of like, oh, like, you're becoming aware of something maybe, kind of that sense of like, oh, dang, like I really do act like that. Um, but we don't have to use it to like continue a narrative of there being this self, right? Or this solidity that we have to keep up the act, and that's the really cool thing. So again, Lama really was just saying, let's bring some clarity and bring some wisdom in. So when we're using radical acceptance, we can kind of parse out a little bit. What is it that we actually need? What is it that we actually don't need, right? But that first step is being able to say, like, it really is like this. It really is like this. Wow. Um, and then I think that can open up the door for change, and we shouldn't be afraid of change because, impermanence is there. And to become enlightened, there are, pieces and parts that change. So I just kind of wrote here, I'll just read off the paper real quick. We are trying to build clarity and that it's a little bit more accurate to bring discernment to karmic patterns so that we can change them to be in line with bodhicitta. So that's kind of our main, intention we're going for is that bodhicitta. So compassion and wisdom. So it kind of turns the two-winged bird into a three-winged bird, right? So now we're working with mindfulness, compassion, but we also got to have that wisdom and clarity piece in there as well. And I actually found that to be just an amazing balance because it's so easy to um, start tripping into kind of trips of maybe guilt or shame. We're starting to realize maybe things about ourselves or about even the world, like things around us. And oftentimes, like, kind of ego comes in and now shame starts to lay on, right? The guilt starts to lay on. So I just think it's an amazing balance to really be able to like stand tall and strong in the midst of our own maybe shortcomings or difficulties and say, you know what? I can handle this. Like I can do this and I can find what I need in, life to benefit myself and others so that, it's like the world's a better place, a more beautiful place, which it already is, in one level. And I think this touches on a point that Tara really brings up. And this is like the first chapter of the book. She calls it the Trance of Unworthiness. And I'm actually going to keep this section kind of short in the talk because I just trust and I know like we all kind of probably know a little bit or have some experience with that trance of unworthiness. I think it's a very familiar feeling where it's almost like you kind of have that sense of, am I even cut out to be human on the planet? You know, like, am I even supposed to be here? Do I belong? And she kind of calls that trance of unworthiness. And it's this kind of unsettled feeling that's really deep down. And often what happens then is, our aversion, attachment, ignorance kicks up because it's like, uh-oh, it feels like it's too much. So I think that really the direction Tara's going, Lama's going, is saying we do have the capability and we are worthy. And now I'd like to get in a little more of like, how can we kind of start that journey? How do we start the journey of finding our worthiness again? So what do we do, right? How do we practice radical acceptance? Tara recommends starting with the body. Okay. And this is great too, because modern psychology these days, I'm seeing a lot more about somatic healing, about getting more into like how trauma lives in the body and all this. And Buddha was talking about it, what was that, 2,500 years ago, and going as far as to say that the first foundation of mindfulness is actually physical sensation, right? That actually is the first foundation of mindfulness. So this is a crucial point because, and then again, I'm just trying to kind of balance Buddhist, with psychology stuff. But, in psychology, if we're talking there's talk therapy, right? And this is great, and it can have profound effects, but for some people it might not work, right? And just like, in our daily lives, we have to use skillful means. So just kind of hinting again at this bigger picture of wisdom, right? How do we actually navigate struggles and not pigeonhole into one thing? So I found that really cool, right? So getting in touch with the body. And, the body and then the mind are also very intimately connected, right? I mean, they're completely interconnected. So even in meditation or whatnot, sometimes maybe, a thought or a situation will come up and, oop, anxiety, ooh, what does it feel like, And then vice versa, you might going about your day, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm tight. And then you look at your mind and it's like, clinging on to things, future mind, all this other stuff. So getting to know the body is that first step. And I think it's cool. Tara talks about kind of some central points, right? She always says, look into the belly, look into the heart and chest, and look into the throat. These are ones we're often carrying, different tensions or holding back, or, that's where different physical sensations may be. And then there's also those terms, right? Like, I felt my stomach drop. It feels like there's a hole in my heart. So I think that that's like a really awesome exploration. And I think it's cool that, again, terms like that have come about through time. People have known that, oh, like different feelings in my body might mean certain things about my situation around me. And then I've seen this firsthand in person. Actually, I was interning at Turning Point's crisis residential program, and we had a client who had a very, challenging time with home life. He was a young man, and he already had 5 kids, I think, and was having some troubles at home. And he was at this residential place trying to take care of his mental health. And he's away from 5 kids, and a girlfriend who's like, hey, like, where are you, right? And he was in a big moment of big emotions, really big emotions. And he didn't know what to do. And I feel blessed, I really value that he had the trust, that he came up and he asked me, hey, Eli, can we talk for a little bit? I was like, let's do it. And we're sitting there, and, hey, what's going on? And it just spills out, boom, right? He's frantic, you could already tell he's really riled up. And I'm like trying to do just good old fashioned, well, what do you think about that? Or what's the best move here? Trying to kind of like approach it from this cognitive place. And it's just like that conversation's just going in circles. And, I said, I was just like, hey man, you want to do a body scan? You want to do a body scan? And it was awesome. I mean, we had been doing them in daily, like our daily groups, and he just lit up, just perked up, like kind of settled his eyes, put his like hands on his knees, and he was ready to go with the body scan. And like in that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, there's different ways that we confront difficulty. There's different ways that we can heal, actually. And we have to find what works in the moment. And I mean, I kid you not, we did, from the toes to the knees to the hips. How's your belly feel? We went all the way up for like 3 to 5 minutes. And halfway through, his leg, which was bouncing before, stopped bouncing. You know, by the end, again, hands are kind of nice, resting on his knees. He's starting to make eye contact again, and he straight up, he looked at me, he said, "You know what? He basically was like, I know what to do." And I was like, "Okay, great." I was like, "Wow!" I was like, "Magic." So it worked. I mean, it was great, and I was like, "Oh my gosh." So that was a really amazing moment. And that's not to say that all of a sudden, like anytime I saw him, I was like, "Hey, what's up, Eli? Like life's great," right? That honestly, that that didn't happen, and that is kind of hard. But it opened up this couple-hour time span where he was able to call his girlfriend, call his kids. He was more settled. He felt like he was more in the right place. Like he understood, like, hey, I really do want to kind of get my mind a little right more for my kids and for my family, right? And I think it's just important to know that sometimes it takes time. It takes time. And there are these awesome moments where immediately the evidence is there, but again, next day, maybe those thoughts are spiraling up again. So it's a really it's something that we have to keep up on and keep applying our diligent effort into. But I think that the exploration can eventually become not only like even a little tightness or something. You could kind of feel it and be like, oh, something's here. And then kind of maybe relax into it, see what happens. Um, so that's what she recommends as the start. Mm-hmm. And I think something cool Tara said about that as well is now we're getting a little also into like again, a little more discernment, right? So we typically have three sensations, right? There's like pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, and they give rise to attachment, aversion, and ignorance. The cool thing Tara says, though, is that sometimes it's not even that like a thought or emotion or a situation is bugging us. It's actually the feeling in our body, right? And that's why the body is a good place to start because there's actually like different, again, tensions and feelings and movement and sensations we can feel in our body. And sometimes that's actually what we're trying to push away. We don't want to feel kind of tight, or we don't want to feel kind of spaced out or, out of touch and numb with our body. So this starts to bring up those aversions, those attachments and whatnot. We start seeking for things that can give us the feelings we want. So I think that's a very interesting thing there. And now I'm looking for, there was something that jumped in my mind, but now I can't quite find it. But I guess I will move on. Oh, there it is. Just to kind of explain that point a little. Our body naturally reacts to stimuli that we find pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And again, bringing in the wisdom piece, there is a very valid reason sometimes to react with aversion, to react with, oh, I need that. I need to take a bite of food to survive. Like, we're actually not demonizing these things. We're just finding out what's actually beneficial and what's not, right? So, our body naturally reacts to stimuli we find pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Something like a warm blanket, and we feel safe, warm, our muscles relax, we sigh and feel warm and giddy. If we touch a hot stove, we immediately react and move away. We feel pain and discomfort. And if we just go about our days, you know, maybe we find that we haven't actually really felt anything at all. So that's kind of more that ignorance piece. You just kind of, by the end of the day, it's like, what really happened there, right? Um, and This mindfulness is the first step to better seeing how things like attachment, aversion, and ignorance or fear arise. The imprints of these sensations over time begin when we're getting wrapped up in responses of attachment, aversion, and ignorance, and eventually we are steeped in confusion about what actually hurts and nourishes us and what we are imputing our fears onto. So that was something that kind of dawned on me too, is like, well, it's valid to pull our hand away from the stove. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. And so we're not actually trying to get rid of all, pain, discomfort, or we're not trying to get rid of things that we might want in life. But it's more about knowing, hey, is this actually good for me? Or, oh, this is something that maybe is conditioned from a toxic relationship or whatever it is. So having that discernment and, I don't know, I feel I'm having a hard time explaining it. But I think I hope the point kind of gets across there. But again, finding out what actually hurts us and what actually nourishes us, right? And then just being mindful of maybe times of confusion, right? So now basically Tara moves into talking about both, she pretty much lays out aversion, attachment, and ignorance, or I guess she uses fear, but I feel like they're very kind of similar. For aversion, she tells the story of Mara and the Buddha. And she describes that Buddha used a lot of radical acceptance in that moment, as he was kind of, facing Mara as on his path to, awakening under the Bodhi tree. So this is the part where I titled the talk Say Yes, because, Siddhartha Gautama was sitting under the tree and he was set. He was set to awaken. He was determined. He said, I'm going to sit here until it happens, or, until he becomes enlightened. And in that moment, Mara came about. And Mara, big, scary demon, here to kind of screw things up and get in your way and, tempt with pretty gals and, say, oh, you can't do this, Buddha. You're not made for this. Come on, man. So Mara's there. And what I noticed when I was reading is unlike maybe some politicians, but what I noticed what the Buddha did is, notably, the Buddha didn't jump up and start throwing hands with Mara. And the Buddha didn't run to the nearest crypto event to invest. He sat strong and tall, yet peaceful and awake, eventually reaching enlightenment, right? So he straight up, simply put, the Buddha didn't run away. Buddha didn't run away. The Buddha said yes to that moment, stuck it out. And just like Mara, right? Mara comes and Mara goes. And eventually Mara was like, I can't do it. Just left. It's gone. And the thing is, the Mara wasn't gone forever. Mara came back even after the Buddha was enlightened. And even the Buddha's attendant, Ananda, every once in a while would say, the evil one is near. And, Buddha wouldn't go duck for cover or say, get that thing out of here, The Buddha would actually say, I see you, Mara. I would pour 2 earthen cups of tea, put him down at a low table between some cushions, only then to take his seat. Right? Just this total, come on in, inviting Mara in for tea. So what's that like? What's that like to invite Mara in for tea? Yeah, just think that's kind of an amazing story there. And, kind of things to, notice maybe throughout the day, or some days, our days have that theme of resistance. Things don't feel right. Traffic sucks. An old injury hurts. People around us might be just acting extra annoying. These are the times that clue us in that it may be time to say yes, right? So kind of, again, just getting to know our little habits and patterns through some radical acceptance, but then also saying, I can say yes in this moment. So bringing in that action, action, action. And that really sends like a strong message of, I am worthy, right? I'm worthy. Now, moving on to attachment. This one was a really insightful chapter for me. I honestly haven't looked much into attachment. I've spent a lot of time doing readings on aversion, doing readings on fear. They've been things I've really struggled with. So reading this, section on attachment was really amazing to me. I was under the impression that desire is truly no good at all, and that attachment just leads to ruin. I think I really was it's like I had an aversion to attachment, I guess you could say. But again, nothing is super, nothing is that straightforward, really, especially as we're kind of climbing up the mountain, right? So Tara brings attention to the fact that desire is actually what brings atoms together. It's what spins galaxy. It's what happens when we fall in love. Even in authentic, genuine love, there's actually desire, but it's in balance, right? It's a healthy desire. Or, man, I'm hungry. I need to eat something. It's like, I don't know why it seems so simple, but it's like it's also just wild to think that when it gets out of hand, what do we see? I mean, we see some of the worst sides of humanity when a full-blown attachment is happening, where desire isn't just left to run its natural course, and instead it's ramped up, right? Or the alternative, and I think in our society, very Christian heavy, Catholic heavy, we've come to like really not like any form of desire. Like desire is bad. Like, so we're kind of in this weird catch 22 where it's like you can look around and be like, how am I supposed to make friends with this when I could see all this terrible stuff happening? But then also it's like I try to make friends with it, and then like that Catholic guilt's kicking in, you know what I mean? I wasn't a Catholic person, but just to use that term. Um, but what I thought was really cool is, again, taking that approach of actually looking at attachment itself when you feel it come up. And that's why it's important to know the body, know what your body feels like when attachment arises, and you'll notice it in the moment or when you're meditating, and really feel it and feel the longing behind it. Because that longing is pointing to something. That longing is pointing to something. And we won't really be able to find out what that deep longing is until we feel the sensations or the attachment running its course through us. But when actually sitting with that attachment and that longing, interestingly, I think it actually points to a very real, profound, loving desire for either happiness or loving others, community. you know um Tara calls it the boundless love, right? The boundless love. That's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to want enlightenment or to want liberation, right? But we have to kind of let attachment burn itself out a bit. And then what I wrote here is I thought this was bars, but I said, seemingly our own basic wisdom can find its way back home when confronted with a clear choice. A clear choice. And I think that's where, again, that radical acceptance comes in, because we can finally fully get a look at our attachment and really see it. And then like underneath it, there's like that like longing for the boundless love, right? As Tara says. And when you kind of feel that and you're like, you see, temporary pleasure and you feel that boundless love, your own basic wisdom, just like clear choice. It's just right there. It's just right there. But I think that's a lot harder, easier said than done. Much easier said than done. I need to practice that. But yeah, I mean, and I think again, have some compassion for yourself. We've been kind of running for a while, right? A lot of times when we come to the Dharma, we've already been running for a long time. So it's going to take a little time, some patience, and getting in touch with that boundless love. And there's a great exercise for that. Since we're I don't want to take too long. I'm just going to read kind of the prompt, but I think it's a really cool exercise. So Tara lays this out, and it's kind of helping us find our longing. Calm yourself, relax, feel spacious and present. Feel kind of that openness, meditation posture. Turn into the heart and ask the question, what does my heart most long for? Let the response emerge and hear it in its entirety. And then ask again. It may be the same response, it may be different. And whatever comes from that. But again, we ask the question, what does my heart most long for? And it could help to even place your hand on your heart when you do it. And a response will come. And maybe when you ask the question again, a different response will come. But if you do it enough and really kind of feel it and follow that longing, it's going to start becoming a theme. And the same thought might start coming up. It's going to feel, you're going to feel it. You're going to feel it and you'll be like, oh, that's what my heart longs for. Or at least you're getting closer. So it kind of is a good way to just, again, we're being accepting of whatever first comes up, but eventually it starts quieting, feeling that true longing. Cool. And then finally, she talks about fear. This one is also kind of short, mainly because I didn't have quite the time to get this part together. But obviously, fear is kind of the biggest undercurrent, right? It's kind of what's behind ignorance. We could say that the fear of death is pretty much what's driving all of our kleshas, attachment, aversion, ignorance. It just comes up in different ways as the ego is trying to protect itself. Be like, nope, I don't want to die, right? What it becomes, though, is a big, scary demon. Now, the funny thing about fear, and it's kind of funny because fear really isn't all that scary. It just seems scary, or it just kind of appears scary when we don't fully look at it, right? So it's kind of like this big, huge monster. And then when you start chopping it up with it and you're like, what's up? It kind of just like, boom, like shrinks a little. And then you're like, all right, come here, give me a hug. And then it's like, and then it becomes like a cute puppy. Um, so, and this is reflected in the great story of Milarepa in his cave. He's meditating. He's I don't know how long he was in there, but he's like very profound meditator and yogi. And he comes back to his cave one day and there's demons in his cave. And, big, smelly, stinky demons everywhere. And, I think he's trying to drag him out and kick him out of here, shoo, shoo. Maybe he's getting, a broom or something and trying to whack him out. I'm kind of adding into the story a little, but basically you get the idea. He's trying to kick the demons out. And they're like, no, dude, we're here, right? We're here to stay. And finally, I think he just says, you know what? Have the place to yourself. When he did that, all the demons disappeared, except for one. Except for one. He was the biggest, baddest demon of them all. And what Milarepa did is he walked up to the demon and he knew that the normal measures weren't going to cut it. And Milarepa put his head in the demon's mouth. And only then did the demon disappear. It's just like, whoa, that is just so wild. So wild. So fear has its strongest hold when it's rejected or regarded as entirely real and true. Stepping into fearlessness is done through community, bringing in wakefulness and spaciousness to the tight, constricted sensations. But yeah, I think that story is just amazing. The story itself speaks for itself. And then my last little exercise activity, and then we're done with the talking portion anyway, is inviting in fear. And this is a cool little imagery exercise y'all could also do if you'd like. And I think it's very practical. And Tara writes it. And basically what you're doing is, again, kind of little meditation, get relaxed, comfortable, spacious, all the good stuff. And bring to your mind that you're sitting on a park bench. Maybe your favorite park. You're sitting on a park bench, sky's blue, birds are flitting through the sky, maybe a little rustle in the wind. Very spacious, right? And you invite whatever your fears or doubts or insecurities are. And you invite them to come sit on the bench with you. And whatever form they may take, you might see, I'm not even going to try because it's really up to you. But whatever the form is, come sit on the bench with you. And it's up to you. You could lean over and say hi. You could also just sit there in company and let that contrast a little bit with the spaciousness of the park, the green of the trees. And, maybe something else comes up, invite that too. you know, oh, look at you trying to be all peaceful. I know you know, and then, hey, you know, maybe you should come have a seat too, kind of thing. So, you know, you're welcome to come have a seat too. So you might feel resistance while confronting your resistance. And that invited in too. You might have a very full park bench. But again, just remembering that space, birds moving, you know, it's nice, it's nature. Um, and hopefully you know, what kind of starts happening is some pacification, letting them be, and then you know, you can have more clarity with your own decisions or our own decisions. And then final warning: Tara warns of the hijacking of spaciousness to escape fear. Right, so we're not trying to escape fear by using spaciousness. Hence the term spacing out. Right, so we're bringing in spaciousness without spacing out. Um, and then the way to kind of remedy this is to recall our awakeness, our awake qualities, so we can be spacious and awake. And that is the talk. So thank you guys. And then I'd love to hear any questions. Yay.
Eli, your talk today just it's just so good.
Thank you.
I learned so much, and thank you for doing this talk today.
Thank you, Patty. Nice.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Come on, folks. I can.
So I explained it really well, I think. No questions.
You know, it's not exactly a question, Eli, but an observation. There is this amazing synergy between that I'm finding also in some of the stuff that I'm reading between modern psychology, attachment theory, you know, all of the various, I don't know them, like I don't have the education that you have in psychology, but this synergy, this remarkable way that many Tibetan practitioners are taking modern psychology and finding the parallels and the wisdom and the embellishment of modern psychology using Buddhist, these ancient teachings. And I just think it's really remarkable that, you know, like they knew this 25 plus 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree.
it's just really amazing.
It is. Yeah, I know it trips me out sometimes. And then but then I think and I'm like, oh my gosh, like if someone really did meditate in a cave for 20 years and they were just like sitting with that, you know, the mind, wow. It's just, yeah, it's amazing. So yeah, I totally agree. And yeah, I think you know, I mean, honestly, psychology is a relatively new profession too, which is a trip, you know, so um I'm curious to see over time too if it even leans a little more towards some Buddhist ideas as well. Because again, like it's kind of followed that progression in a way. Um, but yeah, no, it is amazing. Very cool. Very cool.
It was interesting. You were talking about shame, and then you were talking about worthiness, and I've done some stuff with shame, and a big thing for me was there the idea of that was shame, that I was shame because of something that I had done, and learning that the shame was something that I had done, that I'm not shame. So once I was able to kind of dispel that belief that it was something that I had done, and that I wasn't that act, then I was able to move from that, and I was worthy, because the two were connected, that I was able to gain that I wasn't worthless, that I had worthiness. And also with Kristen Neff and Brene Brown, the two of them, that mindful self-compassion, you were talking about the psychology and the vulnerability, that the two of those sort of things. The mindful self-compassion really has been helpful for me in finding kind of that love and belief in myself, and that growing. And what was it with trauma? The mind, the trauma, something keeps the soul. The
Oh yeah, trauma
keeps
or the body keeps the
body
score.
keeps
Yeah,
it keeps the score. That was
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we know that one.
that was an incredible book. When you were talking about trauma, I mean, they're doing a lot of work on trauma and healing from that. So I mean,
Yeah.
some great stuff.
Totally.
I love.
Oh, thank you. Awesome. Yeah, I'm super glad you're here. I know you have quite a commute, so thank you. Yeah. And yeah, no, I really relate. I mean, I think that's super relatable in terms of like, you know, maybe taking things that, we've done or hard feelings and kind of falling into that trap of like, this is me, the entirety, you know? So yeah, having that breathing room, man, big game changer. And yeah. Hi, Dad. Or
Hi,
okay,
Eli.
yeah. Hi.
Thanks so much for preparing and offering this talk.
Definitely.
I'm I always find it fascinating how I don't know, pre-industrial mind maybe encountered things, or how things appeared to a pre-industrial mind in that crossover. And so I always take these stories of like, oh, invite a demon in or whatever as like symbolic, but sometimes I have a hard time then kind of doing the crossover, like, well, how does Mara appear
Mm,
to a modern mind?
yeah. No, yeah. That is a really good question because yeah, because we kind of see or conditioned to see things from the time period we're in. And I guess, at least for myself, and maybe hopefully this answers the question. But again, we're doing our young people's group and whatnot, and I think it's a